This came to be known as the critical period in American history, the period between Yorktown and the writing of the Constitution. It was a period of economic recession, of political division, and it got to the point with Shays' Rebellion, where the authorities in Massachusetts were basically trying to answer Morris's question by saying, we'll get the $100 now. And they went out to the farmers and they squeezed them as hard as they could, and the farmers said, we don't have any of the, we can't pay these taxes, and they rose up in revolt. Shays' Rebellion was the catalyst. People looked at each other and said, this revolution that we fought was really great, but this thing is not working. Something has to change. What happened was the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Morris and his allies, the nationalist faction, gathering in Philadelphia, Morris's hometown. Morris as the head of the Pennsylvania delegation, basically the host of the convention. Morris, who introduces Washington, the icon of the revolution, to the chair, and Morris, who actually, at the end of the day, every day of that Constitutional Convention, through those 4 months of the summer of 1787, would walk home with Washington, the two of them, to Morris's house, where Washington stayed as his guest. There you had the two of them, the two principal figures of the nationalist coalition, Washington, the commander-in-chief, and Morris, the chief civil executive, agreeing that here's what we need to do. And what did they accomplish there in Philadelphia? Well, for the purposes of Morris and Washington, they accomplished it all when they got there. That being the agreement that there would be a central government, that it would be a powerful central government, that it would have the authority to tax, it would reign sovereign over the individual states on all questions of dispute between the states, but primarily that it would have the power to tax, and in order to raise the money to pay those debts back to France, back to Holland. The denouement of the Constitutional Convention is they do have this power to tax. They form the new government, 1790 in New York. Hamilton is the Secretary of Treasury. He follows Morris's lead with the funding program. They fund the debts of the Confederation. Sure enough, the economy comes roaring back. All those debts are brought back into live capital. Morris talked about the debt being a species of property, and it is. It becomes pools of capital that capitalists can then turn to finance their projects. And it worked wonderfully. The American economy took off, and by 1794, U.S. government debt was the highest rated debt in Europe. It commanded the 10% premium on the European capital markets. It was a great success. What does that tell us about today? Well, I can't say that it tells us anything in particular. There's so much that has changed. The volume of debt, the volume of commerce, the nature of the state. It's now the welfare state, and it's not just here, it's in all the major places on the planet. And we have a new, the dollar is in a new position than it was at the time. It is now the central medium of exchange for the entire global economy. So that we have a lot to answer for if we start screwing around with the dollar. But there are some fundamentals that haven't changed at all. And if they'll give me the last 2 minutes here, I will give you a couple of quotes that I think are really telling, and actually will try to give you something of an answer to the question that I begged off of at the beginning. First, let me quote George Soros, the financier and capitalist, who the nemesis of the American right wing, but a sagacious guy nevertheless. Writing in the New York Review of Books in October, how much public debt is too much? The question does not have a hard and fast answer. The tolerance for public debt is highly dependent on the participants' perceptions and misconceptions. It is reflexive and therefore indeterminate. I think that's actually a little facile. It's not just their perceptions. They might be perceiving correctly that there's problems with the public debt, but The important variable, Soros says, is the interest rate. The higher the interest rate, the heavier the debt burden. The interest rate, as he points out, is based on perception and misconception. It's also based on accurate conception if those debts are not being fully funded. But anyway, Soros goes on, once the risk premium starts rising, the prevailing rate of deficit financing eventually becomes unsustainable. Exactly where the tipping point comes at which government bonds cease to be riskless is difficult to determine because it represents prevailing misconceptions. Well, okay, that's how he puts it. Let's hear from Robert Morris 200 years ago. The more clear, certain, permanent, and increasing the funds are to fund the public debt, the lower will be the interest at which money can be borrowed. Well, okay, it comes down to interest rates. If the funds are very good, money can be borrowed at 4%, perhaps 3%. If they are not good, if there is no confidence in the payment, it will not be procured at less than 6, 7, or 8%, or possibly not at all. It will not be forgotten, Morris cautions, that whether the debt be lesser or greater and whether the interest higher or lower, the people must pay all. In other words, don't be leading people into thinking that they don't have to pay these things. Unless you're ready to go into default. And what does default mean? Well, today, or default on, say the Congress sits there and says, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling, screw it, we're going to see what happens. Well, and in fact, Michael Tomasky in the New York Review books in the current issue is writing about this question. He says, he quotes Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator, saying, to not raise the debt ceiling could be a default of the United States bond and treasury obligations. But I'm going to vote against raising the debt ceilings if they don't cut the budget to 2008. Oh, great. Tomasky's reaction was not failing to raise the debt ceiling could set off anything from global wariness to global meltdown. And I think that's hard to dispute. I'll close with one more quote from Morris, writing to the governor, saying that, once again explaining the virtues of public credit and how you need taxes to support it. He said, we may be happy or miserable as we please, depending on whether we decide we're going to pay these taxes or not. That's what I can contribute to the question of public credit today from these sages of 200 years ago.